I didn't ask to be part of any HOA. Truth is, I owned my ranch land long before the first brick of their little gated neighborhood was ever laid. My family's been here for decades. We raise a few animals, tend to the land, and mostly keep to ourselves. Nothing fancy. Just a quiet life on the edge of town, where the buzz of city drama doesn't usually reach us. Or at least it didn't. Not until the HOA started expanding. About 5 years back, a developer started building new homes right up against the edge of my ranch. I didn't mind. Let them build. The city had sold off that section of land for residential use, and I figured it'd be good for property value. They threw up a clubhouse, a playground, and even a little parking lot for community events. As long as they didn't step on my toes, I didn't plan on stepping on theirs. But like most HOAs, it didn't take long before someone got a little too curious. It started small. I'd noticed cars slowing down to stare at my barn like it didn't belong. Then came the notes, not official, just typed letters taped to my gate. Please remove unsightly debris. Consider painting your shed to match neighborhood standards. My shed was a 2,000 square foot barn that had been red for 30 years. I ignored them. I figured they'd eventually realize I wasn't part of their little committee. But they didn't. If anything, the letters got more confident. One afternoon, I caught a woman I'd never seen before standing at the edge of my fence, snapping pictures of my livestock. She had a clipboard, dark sunglasses, and the kind of smirk that said she liked power more than peace. When I walked over and asked what she was doing, she introduced herself as the president of the HOA board. We've had several complaints, she said. Your property is affecting the appearance of the community. We'll be issuing a formal notice. I couldn't help but laugh. You do realize this isn't part of your community, right? This is private land. You don't run anything here.
She didn't like that.
Not one bit. Her tone shifted instantly from fake nice to sharp. If you continue to ignore compliance notices, we'll take further steps. You'll be hearing from us. And I did. Over and over. I got a new letter every week. Different complaints, all equally ridiculous. My tractor was abandoned equipment. My fencing was in violation of design standards. My goats were excessive noise generators. I kept every one of those letters in a folder labeled nonsense. Then came the big one, an envelope marked urgent. Inside was a typed letter from the HOA attorney claiming I was in violation of zoning ordinances and had 90 days to vacate the property. They used words like community integrity and legal eviction like they meant something. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time staring at that paper. Not because I was worried, but because I was amazed by the sheer level of arrogance. Evict me? From my own land? That's when I started pulling records. I knew my boundaries like the back of my hand, but I wanted it all on paper. While digging through the old family files, I found something even better. A lease agreement. It was old, maybe 15 years back, signed by my father and the original developer who built the HOA clubhouse. Turns out, that whole section of their land, the parking lot, the playground, and even part of the clubhouse building, technically sat on a piece of property we still owned. They didn't buy it. They rented it. And the lease? It was up for renewal in 6 months. I leaned back in my chair and smiled. They were trying to evict me from my own ranch while operating on land that wasn't even theirs. That's when I knew exactly what I was going to do.
The next morning, I made a fresh cup of coffee, sat down at my desk, and reread every page of that lease agreement. The more I looked, the more leverage I found. This wasn't just a casual rental. They were fully dependent on that land for daily operations. Their parking lot wasn't just for guests. It was also used for community events, HOA meetings, and staff. Without it, they'd be out of space and out of order. I highlighted the clause about lease renewal. It clearly said the landowner could adjust rent based on market conditions. When this lease was first signed, the area wasn't worth half of what it is now. They'd been paying peanuts for prime real estate on my ranch, and they had the nerve to try to evict me? I called my attorney and asked him to review everything just to be sure. He called back 2 hours later, laughing. "You've got them by the fence post," he said. "They're sitting on your land like they own it. You could triple the rent if you wanted, or cancel the lease altogether. I didn't want to cause chaos, at least not right away. What I wanted was to send a message. I drafted a formal letter and sent it to the HOA's board with a copy of the lease and a polite note. Asterisk due to current market rates. The monthly rent will be increased effective immediately. Please see the updated agreement and payment schedule. Asterisk. I wasn't being unreasonable. I doubled the rent, which still put them well below the market average for commercial land in the area. But I made one thing clear. They were on borrowed dirt, and the clock had just started ticking. A week passed. No reply. Then I got a letter from their lawyer. Predictable. It said my rent increase was unlawful, predatory, and subject to legal challenge. But that letter didn't scare me, because facts are facts, and I had the deed, the contract, and the law on my side. So I sent my final notice. Astor's failure to sign the new lease or vacate the property within 30 days will result in access being revoked. As of that date, no entry will be permitted to the leased area without written permission. Asterisk. They must have thought I was bluffing. Day 30 came. No rent, no lease, no response. So I took action. I brought in a local contractor and had him install a simple, legal barrier across the entrance to the parking lot. Nothing dramatic, just a large locked cattle gate and 2 signs. One said, "Private property, no access without permission." The other read, "Lease pending, contact landowner." By 9 a.m. the next day, the HOA office was in full panic mode. Calls poured in, emails. One board member even came to my front door, looking like he'd seen a ghost. "You can't block the lot," he stammered. "People need that space. Deliveries, meetings." I stopped him there. "I gave you 30 days. I followed every legal step. You didn't respond. You assumed I'd just back down like everyone else. But I don't answer to the HOA. I'm not your resident. I'm your landlord." He didn't know what to say. Meanwhile, residents started noticing. They'd show up for their morning walks or community yoga sessions and find nowhere to park. The clubhouse events had to be canceled. The HOA newsletter skipped an issue. All because of that gate and the fact that the board ignored reality. I wasn't trying to hurt the residents. They weren't the problem. But they needed to know who was really causing the disruption. So I let the situation speak for itself. One by one, they started asking questions. Not to me, but to their board. Why didn't they pay the rent? Why didn't they respond? Why didn't they know they were renting land in the first place? And just like that, the pressure began to shift. Not toward me, but back toward the very people who had tried to push me out. By the end of that week, things had taken a sharp turn. The same people who once ignored me or sent passive-aggressive stares from across the fence were now looking confused, irritated, and, more importantly, curious. Their carefully organized HOA meetings, garden clubs, and weekend brunches couldn't happen without that parking lot. Residents were parking on curbs, in front of hydrants, even blocking each other's driveways just to get close to clubhouse. Every inconvenience landed straight back in the HOA's lap. The funny part? I still hadn't said a word to the residents. I didn't need to. Word was spreading naturally, neighbor to neighbor. "Did you hear the parking lot's not even HOA land?" One would say. "Apparently they've been leasing it this whole time," another whispered. "And they never renewed the contract?" Seriously, people started piecing it together fast. I could tell from the way their tone changed. I wasn't just the stubborn ranch guy anymore. I was a property owner who'd been treated like a nuisance by the same people who secretly depended on him. Then came the meeting. The HOA called an emergency board session, but with no clubhouse access, they had to host it in a neighbor's backyard. No air conditioning, no sound system, no coffee table with sugar packets, just folding chairs and a lot of red faces. I didn't attend, of course, but a friend of mine who lives nearby was there and told me everything. The HOA president, a man named Greg, tried to calm things down by painting me as uncooperative and difficult. He claimed I was exploiting a loophole for profit, but that story didn't land the way he expected. One older resident, Mrs. Martinez, stood up and asked a question everyone was really thinking. Why didn't you just pay the new rent? Or at least respond to him before it got this far? Greg hesitated, then mumbled something about principle and setting a precedent. That's when the crowd started turning. A few people clapped sarcastically. Others muttered under their breath. Because now they weren't looking at me like the problem. They were looking at their own leadership. A couple of board members tried to shift blame onto Karen, the former HOA president who'd stirred up most of the mess to begin with. But people weren't buying it. Karen might have been the one who started it, but Greg was the one who ignored the lease renewal and pushed the legal boundaries. Meanwhile, I stayed out of it. I spent those days repainting my barn, tending to the livestock, and catching up on fence repairs. Every so often, I'd see someone from the HOA parked near the gate, reading the sign again like they were hoping it had changed. And then, just when I thought things might cool down, I got a certified letter from the HOA board requesting a formal negotiation. No threats, no lawyer language, just a polite request to revisit lease terms and restore access in the spirit of community cooperation. I sat with it for a full day before responding. When I did, I made sure it was clear. I wasn't interested in drama. I wasn't looking to humiliate anyone. But I also wasn't going to let anyone walk over me or pretend I didn't have a right to my own land. I offer a revised lease, with the original double rate still intact, and a 3-year term. Fair, stable, and fully legal. They accepted it within 24 hours. But not before throwing in a condition of their own, a non-disclosure agreement. They didn't want the rest of the residents knowing just how badly they'd fumbled the situation. I didn't sign it. I didn't need to say anything either, because people already knew. Every neighbor who asked me about it got the same response. It's all public record. You're welcome to look it up. And they did. The county records office had a little spike in visits that week. A few folks even emailed me after, thanking me for standing my ground. I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because some people only understand property lines when you draw them in bold. And now, mine were clear. Not long after the new lease was signed, things around the neighborhood got strangely quiet. Almost too quiet. For the first time in months, no one was driving slowly past the ranch with their phone out. No more anonymous complaints. No more letters taped to my gate. The parking lot was open again. The signs were gone, and the cattle gate stayed unlocked. But under that surface calm, you could feel something else. It wasn't peace. It was embarrassment. The HOA board didn't send a community announcement, and there was no mention of the new lease terms in the newsletter. They hoped if they stayed quiet long enough, everyone would forget what happened. But that wasn't going to happen. People talk. And when folks find out their leadership nearly lost their meeting space because of ego, they don't forget easily. A few neighbors I'd never really spoken to started stopping by just a chat. Not a gossip, just small talk, but friendlier than before. One guy even brought over a 6-pack and said, "Didn't know you were the landlord all along. Should have guessed." Another dropped off a bag of fresh peaches and joked that it was a late rent payment on behalf of the HOA. I didn't mind. I wasn't bitter, and I wasn't out for revenge anymore. I just wanted them to understand that I wasn't the outsider here. I'd been part of this land long before the HOA had ever existed. I wasn't against the neighborhood. I was against people pretending they owned what they didn't. Still, the HOA board hadn't really changed. Sure, they were more careful now. They stopped trying to enforce made-up rules beyond their boundaries. But the same people were still in charge, and that meant one thing. They were waiting for an opportunity to get back in control, even if they had to be subtle about it. That opportunity came sooner than I expected. It started with proposed beautification initiative. Sounds harmless, right? A few flowers here, a repaint there. But buried in the fine print of their newsletter was a line about expanding property appearance standards to nearby visible lots, meaning lots like mine. They didn't mention me directly, but the intention was clear. They wanted to push new rules about fencing color, livestock visibility, even how early equipment could be operated, all under the excuse of improving neighborhood consistency. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time. It was careful, not illegal, not loud, just calculated enough to fly under most people's radar. So I did what I always do. I stayed calm, and then I got strategic. First, I wrote a letter to the board requesting clarification. I asked how these proposed changes would apply to properties not under HOA jurisdiction. The response I got was vague and full of legal fluff. They claimed it was voluntary for now, but strongly encouraged by the Board for Community Harmony. Then I contacted the city planning office. Turns out, the HOA had filed a request to rezone a strip of buffer land between my ranch and the edge of their development. It wasn't approved yet, but it was sitting in a folder waiting for review. That's when it hit me. They were trying to box me in, shrink my flexibility, make me part of the HOA without ever saying it out loud. If they could pull that off, they could try controlling what I did on my own property, even without owning it. I wasn't going to let that happen. So I went public. I printed copies of the rezoning proposal and walked them to a dozen houses around the neighborhood. No drama, no speeches. Just, hey, I thought you might want to see this. Could affect more than just me. It worked. People weren't thrilled. Nobody wants their HOA to start expanding when they already struggle with the rules in place. And with everything that had happened over the last few months, residents were already suspicious of the board. The next HOA meeting was packed, not with their usual loyal audience, but with regular homeowners who had questions, real ones. Some even asked why the board was spending money on legal consultants when they couldn't even manage their current budget without raising dues. For once, the heat wasn't on me. It was on them. The morning after that packed meeting, I sat on my porch with my coffee, watching the sun stretch over pastures. A few cows grazed near the fence, totally unaware that a political storm had rolled through the night before. But I was fully aware, because for the first time since this whole mess started, the power shift was obvious, and it wasn't going the HOA's favor anymore. One of the neighbors, James, who used to avoid eye contact, now waved every time he jogged past. Another neighbor even stopped his car near my gate and said, "Whatever you said to them last night, that needed to be said months ago." I hadn't even spoken at the meeting. I didn't need to. The documents I handed out did the talking for me. By now, the HOA board wasn't just being questioned. They were being doubted. People were finally asking the right things. Why were they picking fights with landowners? Why were they pushing policies no one voted on? Why were dues rising every few months while nothing ever improved? The board's response? Silence. They tried to act like everything was fine, hoping the tension would pass. But the homeowners weren't letting it go, and I could feel the heat turning up. Then one afternoon, a new letter showed up in my mailbox. But this one wasn't from the HOA. It was from a private contractor, hired by the board, asking for permission to inspect my fence line and property boundaries as part of a long-term planning review. That one made me laugh out loud. They still hadn't learned. They couldn't bully me. So now they were trying to get permission to snoop, wrapped in professional wording. I didn't respond to the contractor. I forwarded the letter to my lawyer, who sent back a beautiful, polite piece of legal writing that basically said, "Stay off the property." No more contractors came by after that. But what did come was a slow crumble of the HOA's confidence. They began canceling events, not because of me, but because attendance kept dropping. People weren't showing up for wine nights or garden socials. The community started talking to each other outside the HOA's umbrella. Some even formed their own neighborhood group chat, independent of board oversight. And just like that, the HOA's grip started slipping. About a week later, I heard through grapevine that Greg, the current HOA president, was considering stepping down, not because he wanted to, but because he was facing pressure from within the board itself. They'd lost control of the narrative. They'd lost trust. And all because they picked the wrong battle. Still, I didn't celebrate. Not yet. Because if there's one thing I've learned dealing with folks like this, it's that just when you think they've backed off, they find a new angle. So I stayed ready. The next twist came when the HOA tried one last move, quietly offering to buy the section of land they leased from me. The same land they refused to pay new rent for just weeks earlier. The offer was lowball, of course, like they thought I'd sell just to be done with it all. But what they didn't understand was that this land wasn't just property to me. It was leverage, history, and after everything they'd pulled, they weren't getting it. I declined the offer without even making a counter. And the best part? word of their attempt leaked out anyway. A couple of board members were furious, not at me, but at Greg, for trying to negotiate in secret without bringing it to a vote. The cracks widened. More resignations followed. Meanwhile, life at the ranch went on like always. I fixed the tractor, repaired a bit of siding on the barn, helped my neighbor chase down her runaway chicken. Nothing dramatic. Just the kind of peace that comes when people finally stop trying to control what they don't own. Funny thing is, I never asked for any of this. I wasn't looking to teach anyone a lesson. But if you try to evict a man from his own land, you'd better make sure you're not renting your office from him, because eventually the rent comes due. A few weeks passed, and the HOA seemed to shrink into itself. Meetings were smaller. Their newsletters got shorter. Nobody was walking door to door handing out notices anymore. You could feel it. Their power had deflated. But even though things had calmed down, I knew better than to think it was over for good. People like that don't just disappear. They wait, they watch, and then they try to strike when they think you've let your guard down. I stayed alert. I kept every letter, every lease copy, every piece of communication backed up and printed. I kept my fence lines clear, the signs posted, and my boundaries well marked. The ranch was in better shape than ever. Funny how dealing with trouble sometimes motivates you to polish up what's yours. Then something odd happened. One afternoon, a different board member, Rachel, the treasurer, showed up at the gate. No attitude, no clipboard. She didn't even get out of the car at first. Just waved until I walked over. I debated ignoring her, but curiosity got the better of me. She rolled down the window and said, "I just want to say, some of us didn't agree with how things were handled." I didn't reply, just waited. She went on, said she'd stayed quiet too long, said that the whole board had been under pressure from Greg and Karen's influence for months, and that a few of them were trying to push for a full change in leadership. I asked her, why now? She looked down for a second, then back at me, because when you blocked that parking lot, we realized you weren't the one making trouble. You were just protecting what's yours. I didn't say much, just gave her a nod. She handed me a sealed envelope and drove off. Inside was a letter, not from the board, but from a group of residents. A petition to hold a vote to remove the current president and restructure the HOA board. Dozens of signatures. Some from people who used to glare at me like I was the enemy. That night, I sat on the porch again and thought about how fast things can flip, how a group of people so sure of their power could fall apart the moment real accountability showed up, and how sometimes doing nothing more than standing your ground is enough to expose everything that's broken. I didn't sign the petition. I didn't need to. I wasn't a member of their HOA, and I didn't want to be. But I did write a short note and taped it to my fence the next day. Just 5 words. Still not part of HOA. They got the message. A few days later, I heard Greg had officially resigned. No farewell speech. No explanation. He just sent an email saying it was time for new leadership to step in. From what I heard, the board didn't even thank him. Karen, meanwhile, had all but vanished. No more backyard gossip sessions. No more late-night emails or sudden visits. Someone said she moved in with her sister a few towns over. Apparently, her retirement plan had hit a few bumps. But not everything was falling apart. In fact, with Greg gone, the new board started making better choices. They canceled that rezoning request, stopped trying to rewrite the rulebook every month. They even invited residents to vote on new community improvements for the first time in years. People actually started attending meetings again, voluntarily. One afternoon, while checking fence posts on the far side of the property, I noticed something strange. A small group of teenagers cleaning up trash along the edge of the HOA trail that bordered my land. Not making noise, not causing trouble, just doing something helpful. I asked one of them what they were doing. He said the HOA started a volunteer crew. Try and make things better, he shrugged. It's kind of boring, but my mom says we owe it to the neighborhood. Maybe boring's what they needed. As I walked back to the barn, I realized I hadn't had to call my lawyer in nearly a month. No letters, no complaints, No threats, just grass growing, animals feeding, and neighbors finally staying in their own lanes. It felt good, not like victory. Just right. Summer rolled in heavy that year. Thick skies, long days, and a kind of slow heat that made time feel slower. The ranch stayed steady through it all. Gates in place, fences holding strong, livestock calm. And for once, the HOA kept to themselves. Not a whisper, not a letter, not even a sideways glance from a neighbor. It felt like breathing after holding your lungs tight for months. But just when you think a storm's passed, that's usually when it circles back. It started with an invite, a handwritten one, dropped in my mailbox. It was from the new HOA president, a younger guy named Tyler. "You're invited to our summer town social," it said. "Come meet the board, meet the neighbors. Let's start fresh." I held that card in my hand for a good 10 minutes. Not because I was touched, and not because I was mad. I just didn't know what to make of it. This was the same HOA that had once tried to run me off my own land. Now, they wanted me to mingle over lemonade. I almost tossed it. But then I thought, maybe it's worth showing up, not to make peace, not to play nice, but just to let them know I wasn't going anywhere and never was. So I showed up, wore my old ranch boots, jeans still dusty from the morning's chores. Didn't bring a plate of cookies or a smile for show. Just showed up the way I've always been. The event was held near the clubhouse. Same building they almost lost the lease to. A few folding tables, some balloons, a weak Bluetooth speaker playing country pop. It was awkward at first. People didn't know if they should say hello or look away. Tyler came over first, shook my hand, said, "Glad you came." I gave him a polite nod. He didn't press, just walked me to the drinks table and said, "Everything's changed now? We want to keep it that way." Some folks came by after that, quietly, like they didn't want to be seen talking to me, but didn't want to ignore me either. One woman said her kids loved the sound of my roosters in the morning. A man thanked me for keeping things real. Funny how quick people switch up when the tide turns. Later that evening, a few of the older neighbors pulled out lawn chairs and started swapping stories. Somehow, talk turned to the past year. I stayed quiet, just listening. One man must have been pushing 80, said something that stuck. "You can't build peace by pretending nothing happened. You build it by facing what did." He looked straight at me when he said it. I gave a small nod and tipped my cup his way. That was the only acknowledgement either of us gave. And honestly, it was enough. As the sun dipped down and the bugs started humming, I walked back toward my truck. Before I got there, Rachel, the board member who came to me weeks ago, stopped me. She asked if I'd ever consider helping the board from the outside. "What does that mean?" I asked. "Nothing official, just guidance. You understand land and people better than most of us. We could use that perspective." I didn't say yes. I didn't say no either. Just told her, "You all know where to find me if you really want to do things right." On my way back to the ranch, I watched the clubhouse get smaller in the rearview mirror. The laughter, the small talk, the attempt to repair what had cracked. It was all still fragile, but it was something. I wasn't interested in joining their club or sitting on any board, but I did care about the land and maybe, just maybe, about keeping things balanced, because I learned something through this whole mess. When you own land, you don't just own dirt. You own history, memory, space that holds meaning. And if someone tries to take that from you, the fight isn't just legal, it's personal. It's about reminding people that ownership means more than paperwork. It means presence. It means staying rooted, even when someone tries to dig you up. So I keep showing up, quietly, confidently, not for them, but for the land itself.